Welcome to Crunching Tackles, where we break down the hardest hitting social issues in sports. On today's show, how is the new war in Iran impacting the world of sports? And what does the sports world in Iran tell us about their government and regime? My name is Chad Wiley, and with me, as always, is John Neckersov. And John, I don't have anything clever or funny or witty for you today. I'm ready to podcast, and I hope you're doing well.
No, it is. It's a serious topic that we're going to talk about today, and one that I think is really worthwhile. It's one that we've obviously covered, I would say, sports in the broader Muslim world and Middle East quite a bit over the course of this show, but Iran is not a country that we've necessarily focused on, I think, in any like specific episode throughout our time. Obviously, we've talked about individual games that feature Iran, like when Iran played the US in the World Cup a few years back. But this is obviously a very serious time, a very momentous time. It feels like the world is just changing in front of our eyes, literally constantly. And obviously, you and I are both very in the weeds of all the political and geopolitical and foreign relations things that are going on right now and the ramifications of that. But the nature of this war and the nature of what the institution of the government of Iran is mean that sports are a part of this conversation in different ways. And so we definitely felt like today was a good time to kind of take a step back and talk about what this conflict means for the people of Iran, for athletes who live in Iran and sporting competitions at large, and then also look ahead a little bit toward the World Cup this summer, which is going to be in the U.S. and as of right now, technically does feature Iran, but we'll get to that about whether that's actually going to happen. So looking forward to it. Do you want to talk about the Olympics just really briefly before we launch into all the sobriety?
This is not the first podcast that we've devoted to specific war's impact on sports. I don't even believe it's the second podcast that we've devoted to a different war that has impacted sports just in the time that we have been a podcast. And so we're going to have to talk a lot about obviously what's going on in Iran and the broader implications of it to the rest of the Middle East and the rest of the world from a sporting perspective. We're also going to kind of, I think, use sports as a small microcosm to kind of talk about what life and freedom looks like in the Iranian regime. So that's going to be our big story for today. But first, as you mentioned, John, the last time we podcasted, we did an Olympic recap too soon.
We
We
did.
missed
It's true.
something.
Yeah.
We missed one big thing. I think we were podcasting on like the second or third to last day of the Olympics, and we got to talk a lot about the many important things like the quad god and Alyssa Liu, and we had much anticipation about the final event of the 2026 Winter Olympics, which was going to be the gold medal hockey game between the USA and Canada on the men's side. And wow, sports are awesome.
Sports truly are awesome. We didn't get to, Katie and I didn't get to watch it live Sunday morning, but we did watch the replay that evening. And it is just the best of what sports can be, the best of what hockey can be, international rivalries, the U.S. winning Olympic gold in men's hockey for the first time since 1980. So since like the movie Miracle, if you've seen it,
Which
we
I
literally,
watched the night before the gold medal game.
the ultimate pregame, which is just an amazing choice by you. I just couldn't believe, first of all, that we hadn't won since 1980. Like that, for some reason, I just thought we were better at it. Maybe that was just my assumption since the NHL is in the U.S. that we somehow, just produced a ton of great players outside the NHL that were good, but apparently not. But now that the NHL players were allowed in Olympic hockey this year, we made it happen. Jack Hughes, just American All-Star. That picture of him with the missing tooth is just like the sports photo of the year, I think, automatically.
Yeah, it's amazing. He lost a tooth or had a chipped tooth earlier in the game, and then went on to score the winning goal in overtime. This is, of course, right after the USA women's team won the gold medal, also in overtime, also against Canada. And but on the men's side, John, I love the statistic, which is that this gold medal hockey game, was the most watched sporting event in American US television history that started before 9 a.m.
Really? That's a great
Yeah.
stat.
And lots of people in church must have been tuning in because it was it was early, but I mean, it did a massive television number. I think that stat's really funny, and then in many ways, the men's and the women's U.S. hockey teams continued to remain, I think, in the culture in many interesting and surprising ways for the next, week or so after the Olympics as well.
Yes, this is very true. It all started when FBI Director Kash Patel somehow ended up in the locker room. Like he had traveled to Italy supposedly to like talk to the Italian government about securing the Olympics or something like that.
Well, that's how he
Um,
got the taxpayers to pay for it.
right, exactly. And then somehow that official state-sponsored trip ended up with Kash Patel with a winner's medal in the locker room of the men's hockey team, which is just was an interesting moment. Maybe not a great spending of money, not something I care about all that much, but it felt very Salt Bay. If you remember from the World Cup final in 2022, where you're just like, why are you the center of this? Much like when Trump got to hold the trophy at the Club World Cup. Do you remember this when he did the lift with
Yeah,
Chelsea?
yeah, he was right in the middle of the team celebration with next to Reece James,
At
and
least he's slightly more related to the team here, not in any truly meaningful way, but more so than Chelsea. Which he just wasn't. There was no relation at all. So anyway, that was interesting. I believe the players, did they already go to the White House or have they not yet?
well, okay, we need to talk about this because this did turn into a bit of a scandal
Mm-hmm.
um, in the immediate aftermath of the game, and then it kind of carried over, I think, for the next little bit. So the game was on Sunday morning, early on Sunday morning, and then Trump called them. I called the men's team in the aftermath of the win, and essentially invited them to the State of the Union address, which was going to be on Tuesday, and then said something along the lines of, "Oh, and I guess I'll have to invite the women's team so that I don't get impeached." And then the men's team, you know, laughs about it over the phone, and it's the kind of thing that sounds exactly like something that Donald Trump would say,
Naturally.
and also is, I think, fairly viewed as quite dismissive of the women's team, who um who did not appear at the State of the Union, although almost the entire men's team did make a special appearance at the State of the Union, in which Donald Trump announced that he was going to award USA hockey goalie Connor Hellebuck with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. As far as I can tell, the first hockey player to receive such an award, and so that's exciting. Um, but this kind of like this pitting of the men's team and the women's team against each other was, I think, not what either of the teams wanted to happen. Certainly not the way that the men's team wanted to be perceived, and so this even carried over into SNL last Saturday night when Connor Story, who was the host of SNL and is only known for the gay hockey drama Heated Rivalry, and had both of the Hughes brothers and a couple women from the women's team at SNL as part of his like opening monologue, and they made a joke about how like this time we invited the women and the men just tagged along. So everyone took it well. Everyone seemed to handle it as well as they could in the aftermath, trying to clean up the situation. I don't believe that the men's team wanted to be viewed as dismissive toward the achievements of the women's team. I'm going to stop monologuing here in a second. I would love to see if you have any serious reaction to that. But, Trump continues to, I think, put people in awkward and difficult situations, especially regarding athletes. He did the same thing. He posted an AI video of
Forgot about this.
That deep faked one of the USA players saying something like very disparaging about Canada. Was it Brady Kachuk that he
You're
had?
yeah, yes.
Yeah,
This did happen too.
he basically posted a fake interview with allegedly with AI Brady Kachuk, one of the USA players, saying some disparaging things about Canada. And then Brady Kachuk had to come out and be like, I do not like that my image and voice was used for these words that, do not reflect what who I am. So yeah, Trump just continues to make him the center of stories that really have nothing to do with him at all, and continues to put athletes in very awkward and uncomfortable positions, having to where so much of the attention in the aftermath of their great success has to be devoted to this guy who just can't stop inserting himself into the story.
Right, which is perfectly exemplified by the AI video that I thought you were going to bring up, which was
There are too
another
many
AI
AI
video
videos from the White House, John. Way too many AI videos from this White House.
of Trump inserting himself as one of the male hockey players.
This also happened.
Skating through the hockey rink around hapless Canadians, scoring the winning goal, and then beating up Canadian hockey players.
This is a video of AI Donald Trump in a full suit, but wearing hockey gloves, hockey skates, and holding a hockey stick. AI participating in the gold medal game, and like you said, scoring and also engaging in fisticuffs against members of the Canadian national team.
Yeah,
That's our president, I guess. Apparently,
it is. I think ultimately my thought here, there are plenty of areas where, in terms of Donald Trump's policies, that I can certainly get mad about. This is a category of things where, maybe I should get more annoyed than I do, but to me, it's kind of like I've just accepted it at this point to a degree. Obviously, I don't support at all diminishing the accomplishments of the women's team. In as much as he did, I don't think it's something I didn't like that I did see a lot of places was people basically tying the men's hockey team not like pushing back on him on the phone call as somehow a denigration against these young men who are all put in a very awkward situation, and they're like, why aren't you using your platform to yell at the president over the phone? Like, if you're
15 minutes after you won the gold medal.
Yeah, like if you're a young person speaking to the president of the United States, whatever you think about him, like, I think putting that expectation that like silence is complicit agreement with that statement is just a little ridiculous.
Yeah, and,
so
even when Trump said the women, before he made his joke, when he said the name of the women's team, the players started cheering. And then he made, whatever joke he made, and I think that they just kind of, it could be just awkwardness. It could be not exactly hearing exactly what he said, because it's a bunch of people huddled around one phone on speakerphone and just kind of like, awkwardly laughing. They just had one of the greatest moments of their life, and the president of the United States calls them. And so I definitely don't hold that against the team. And like I said, I think like the Hughes brothers and others have put in the work to be, I think, united with the women's team, and even maybe gave more credit than they needed to Connor Story and their contribution to hockey over there on HBO.
Yeah, that was really something that was all too present during this Olympics in a way that just, I don't know that I needed it, but I'm just going to be really real. But it was there throughout the Olympics. And ultimately, the very mild controversies aside, it was a great Olympics. Like, we had awesome stories. We had awesome storylines. The U.S. had an incredible historic performance, breaking the gold record, as we said last time, even further for the U.S. in the Winter Olympics. It was a great showing. We had some new household names develop at the Olympics, which is just, it's what the Olympics is all about for us. And America continues to shine on the Olympic stage, which is awesome.
Yeah. John, there was a pretty spirited, I think, grassroots protest movement to try to get the IOC to ban Iran from the Winter Olympics in the wake of the I guess we're calling them massacres that the Iranian regime perpetrated against their own citizens as the citizens were peacefully protesting. That did not happen. They were not banned from the Olympics, and in fact, 4 Iranian athletes did participate in the 2026 Winter Olympics. But since the Olympics, since the State of the Union speech from a week ago tonight, things in Iran have really escalated, and we're going to talk a little bit about. Obviously, most of this will be focused on how the situation both impacts and reflects on sport culture in Iran. But I wonder if you have any just initial impressions about the headlines and the videos and everything that we've been seeing here in the last week or so.
No, absolutely. Yeah, so to set the stage a little bit. So if you're not familiar with the exact specifics of what's going on beyond the fact that the US is essentially at war with Iran, um, about a month, I guess probably a little over a month ago now, um, massive protests broke out across all of Iran against its dictatorial Islamist regime, led by its dictator Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Uh, the Ayatollah had been in power essentially since 1989, when the one previous dictator of Iran died. Iran basically overthrew its monarch, the Shah, in 1979. There was a lot of controversy and drama, and the U.S. embassy was stormed, and there are lots of places that you can go to learn about everything that happened then. But basically, since 1979, Iran has been a fundamentalist Islamist state that has been a sponsor of terror around the world, that has repressed its own people. It has been one of the most repressive regimes and most dangerous countries in the world since that time. Specifically, since 1989, Ayatollah Khomeini took power, Iran has grown from just a revolutionary state to a regional power that funds terrorism throughout the Middle East and also abroad, even further. And the reality is, there are many fundamentalist Muslims who support the Iranian regime as it stands today, but a huge amount, some estimates, I was the New York Times, the daily podcast said that they estimate that around 80% of Iranians pretty heartily oppose the regime as it stands today. And so protests, fairly often will break out, but the regime puts them down. But after the basically the 12-day war that Israel fought against Iran last year, things really came to a head. The Iranian economy started collapsing, and people had enough and started realizing the Iranian regime is weak, and now is our time to protest. And tens of thousands of people throughout Iran took to the streets. Students were protesting. People were genuinely filling streets in every city in Iran, protesting the government, asking for for relief, for freedom. And the Iranian government, knowing that it was teetering on the brink, took to the streets in response and just began machine gunning and sniping people in the streets. Just genuinely awful. There are some estimates that believe that up to 30,000 civilians were massacred in Iran in the last couple of months. President Trump at the time spoke and said that he wasn't going to let it happen. And then basically nothing happened for a month. And it turns out that since that time, basically the US and Israel were gearing up for these strikes. So the US is essentially at war with Iran now. Planes have been striking Iranian facilities. An Israeli strike killed Ayatollah Khamenei, who had been in power for over 3 decades. And Iran is now basically striking out at all of its neighbors, including Jordan, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, as well as U.S. bases. So we are, to finish the monologue, we are, beginning a very serious conflict that is going to change the Middle East forever. How exactly that is going to happen, what that means for the people of Iran is something we can talk about a little bit. But I think my initial reaction as we start talking about this is that to set the stage here, we have to acknowledge the reality that the government of Iran has been destroying its own people for decades. And even if you, the listener, do not agree with the US's actions, what we're going to talk about today is something that is bringing celebration to the Iranian community, both in Iran and around the world. And I just think that's like what people are experiencing is the tottering of a regime that has literally butchered them for decades. So those are my introductory thoughts, at least.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, obviously I don't plan on providing any insight into the prudence or strategy of America's interventionism in the Middle East. That is a story that has been much debated for much of time and will continue to be so. And that's not the purpose of this podcast. Um, but I do think that something that this podcast will make clear is that Iran, the government of Iran since 1979 has been a uniquely evil force of bad in the world.
Mm-hmm.
That and the downfall of the Ayatollah Khamenei is something to celebrate. Um, we talked about how we I think you and I both listened recently to a podcast series about the Islamic Revolution in Iran from our friends at the Rest is History podcast, and they talked about how, frankly, anonymous Iran was before the first Ayatollah took power. How the U.S. and the Western media almost paid Iran no attention at all, and in the wake of the Ayatollah, Iran became a much more significant global and regional power. They have attempted to nuclearize themselves at several points and to obtain nuclear weapons. They are closely allied with other Western adversaries like China and at times Russia. And I think significantly, and this is being reflected in this war, because I think it's easy for people to look at us, right? We are two Western people of American and Israeli heritage, and you are, and to say, oh, of course, these guys hate Iran. But I think if you even look at how hostile Iran's relationship is with other countries in the Middle East, like the ones you mentioned, like the UAE, like Saudi Arabia, like Qatar and Bahrain and Kuwait and Jordan, all countries that they have attacked and retaliated against this week. It's clear that Iran, even by Middle Eastern standards, is a unique evil, where they are even being they are viewed as adversarial by many of their own regional peers due to how um, destabilizing and chaotic and repressive they have been at the entire time that they have been an Islamic republic, and republic is doing a lot of work there because they're really not a republic. But so that's, I mean, I guess that's kind of the background I would like to bring to it, which is that we are not going to be justifying or not justifying U.S. involvement. We're not going to be spending a whole lot more time talking about the strategic or military purposes of this, but it is worth talking about not just how Iran will be affected in sports in the future, but also just what life has been like for women and for athletes in Iran for the last several decades that has led to obviously a mass revolution against the government regime and sheds a light on just the evil, repressive regime that this government has perpetrated on its own people and then also on the rest of the world.
No, I think 100%. I think it's very well said. And the case of Iran in a sporting context, like remember we talked about Russia last podcast and about the Ukrainians not being allowed to protest in the way that they wanted to at the Olympics. And we talked a little bit about the ban of Russia in most international competitions right now due to its actions in Ukraine. And you brought up the ban of the potential ban of Iranian athletes in the Winter Olympics. And I think it's that question of kind of the tie between a country's ideals and the symbol of a country winning on an international stage and the individual athletes who make up those teams and those federations. is an interesting place to start as kind of an illustration of why sports matters here, because I do think that sports actually really does matter in this conversation. Um, like you said, a this is a show that always touches politics in different ways without being an overtly political show, right? And here I think this is a category where we understand. I think we will finish this conversation, and hopefully you will, the listener, understand a little bit better too. Understand what it's like to live in Iran, um, what it's like for the people who have lived under this government for so long, and then if that is something that you can bring back to think differently about the broader political context that we're all sifting through and processing through, I think that's time well spent. Ultimately, we always say like sports matter because people matter, and the Iranian people certainly do matter. And as a result, like, Iranian sports really do matter in a fascinating way here. I think maybe do you want to start by just talking a little bit about the sporting scene right now, because things have been really interrupted in global sports due to this war, and that's kind of like an easy place to start. And then maybe we can start thinking about like the broader consequences and what life has looked like in Iran in the sporting world over the last decades, and kind of where we expect things to go from here.
Yeah, so the Iranian women's soccer team played, was it yesterday on Monday?
Yeah,
Or
Monday or Sunday. Yeah.
yeah, very recently, and we will talk a little bit more about a protest that the Iranian women did during the playing of their own national anthem. I think we're going to come back to that story. I think obviously one of the biggest headlines to come out of this, or biggest speculations, is Iran's involvement in the 2026 World Cup, which now
Mm-hmm.
seems to be in serious jeopardy. President Trump was asked about that today. He seems completely uninterested in whether or not Iran is able to come. The president of the Iranian Soccer Federation also expressed pessimism that that is going to happen. He basically said, we are at war with the host country. They have attacked us and we are going to retaliate. And it seems quite unfeasible that in the midst of those circumstances, a delegation of Iranian officials and athletes could come to this country and other countries in North America and participate in a sporting event. That seems like one that seems risky for their own safety. And I think it also seems like a significant national security threat to this continent. And so I would be at this point shocked to see Iran here in the summer. Beyond that, there have been several tennis matches in the Middle East that have been impacted by this, and I think one thing that I'm looking at also is in April, Formula One, which gets underway this week in Australia, but in April, race 4 and 5 of the F1 season this year are supposed to take place in Bahrain and then in Saudi Arabia in April. And so even those events, I think, seem to be slightly at risk given um, the tensions between those countries and Iran as well, and even the exchange of fire that those countries have faced here just this week. A lot of we've talked a lot about how much sport the center, or if not the center, but significant sporting events have moved to the Middle East recently across all sports. Tennis and Formula One, I think, are two foremost examples of that. And here we see the implications of that when this region goes to war.
No, that's exactly right. And like I said, Iran has been firing drones and missiles at a lot of those Gulf states in particular where U.S. bases are, and also, they're countries that clearly Iran is lashing out at this point. Um, some tennis matches were played over there, and pro tennis players like Daniil Medvedev and Holger Rune are currently, at least as of a day or two ago, were stuck in Dubai. Basically, the entire Middle East right now is a closed airspace to commercial flights. So people who are stuck over there cannot get out currently, and that includes, professional athletes of all kinds. On March 27th, Spain is slated to play Argentina in the Finalissima Trophy, which was going to be played in Qatar, which is the kind of like mini final between the champions of South America and Europe in soccer. That's in jeopardy as well. So there is just like a huge scheduling issue around all those games, like you said, that are scheduled in various sports to take place in those Gulf states. Um, it is just remarkable that, like, again, going back to how we talked, I guess it was a couple podcasts ago about the ebbs and flows of the sports washing projects that are taking place in those Gulf states. I don't think this means that those projects are all going to go away in the different countries, but it's interesting to see how I think this conflict will drastically shape the way the Middle East looks in the next decade. And the question of like what that looks like from a sporting context, I do think is a genuinely very serious one that we don't have a foregone conclusion to. Um, if anything, I continue to wonder what the investment of these states will be in sports with much bigger kind of issues going on. Especially, we've talked about it with Saudi Arabia, but I wonder the same with countries like the UAE and Qatar. So that's just an interesting note. Um, but yeah, I mean, back to the World Cup. I think there's no way. President Trump, like you said, was asked, and he basically was like, "I don't care." Um, so there's still time, but the question of how long this war is going to last is the biggest question. I think the biggest question in terms of Iran participating is just if if the government actually collapses and a different government friendly to the United States were to actually take over, maybe there would be a possibility that things would change. Um, but we're only a few days into this conflict. I don't know how realistic of a objective that even is for the U.S. Obviously, um, and we really don't. The U.S. the White House was projecting that the war could last 4 or 5 weeks. It could last longer than that. Obviously, it could last much shorter. We really have no idea, and so the question is really how long is FIFA going to be willing to wait to kind of make this decision along with the U.S. It's really almost unprecedented that a country would withdraw from qualifying to the World Cup. The last time that it happened was 1950, post World War II, um, when a significantly kind of shrunken world. I think there were like 13 teams, if I remember correctly, that played. So most likely, what would happen here is either um, FIFA would shrink the group, which includes New Zealand, Belgium, and Egypt, to 3 teams, or they would bring in. They basically have unilateral decision making to decide how to choose who would make it in. So the United Arab Emirates and Iraq are kind of the next teams down the totem pole in terms of qualification from Asia. So it's possible that one of them would make it in if Iran was actually removed from the running. But yeah, I think we're in a unique situation here where Iran has actually like easily qualified for the World Cup and now is all of a sudden in a situation where I just don't think that even if FIFA allowed them to, the US would not. And so that just kind of ends the story there.
Yeah, I don't think that World Cup hosting should play a primary role in a government's foreign policy decision making. Like, I don't think the fact that the US is hosting this World Cup should be a determining factor in what it does militarily. But I guess, like, from a purely like like host, like, does the host of of a World Cup just have the unilateral authority to ban qualified teams from attending? Like, that's crazy to me. It seems like FIFA would have a strong vested interest in preserving the integrity and the sanctity of their sport by making sure that any team that rightfully qualified could participate. Like, what a weird um and bad precedent you're setting if a government can if the hosting country can bar a team that they want to bar based on military or safety concerns. Like, um, that seems quite problematic, just geopolitically for not just for this World Cup, but for other World Cups going forward. I'm not saying that Iran. I think Iran should be here, but like, is that even a consideration at all? Like, I don't know.
I mean, I think it's a good question to ask and hash out. I think that it's obvious that Gianni Infantino, the president of FIFA, does not want to be on Donald Trump's bad side. And so it seems like it's a foregone conclusion from Infantino's mind, who would be the authority that would be pushing for Iran's conclusion or inclusion in this case. Um, I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that in a similar situation that he would necessarily push Russia, for example, super hard if in a weird world where like Russia was hosting a World Cup right now and Ukraine was coming, like I don't know like how much leverage Infantino thinks he has on the actual geopolitical stage.
Yeah, but even like go backwards, like if Qatar in 2022 had just decided, hey, either like we don't want Israel there. Obviously, I don't think Israel was in the World Cup, but like hypothetically, we don't want Israel there, or hey, we don't think that we can guarantee Israel's safety if they come. Like that starts compromising the entire existence of this tournament. If host countries can just be like, nah, not you guys.
I mean, it's happened like on a small scale. There's obviously been arguments in Ireland. I don't know if we've talked about in the show about they got drawn in the same Nations League group as Israel. I think they've decided that they're going to let them host it, but Ireland internally for some time was saying like we can't guarantee the player safety, we can't guarantee that our country isn't going to be set on fire if Israel comes here. So that's a very real conversation that was happening. But my mind goes back to I forget what year it was, but there was a Europa League final that was hosted in Baku, Azerbaijan, between Arsenal and Chelsea, which was it was an odd situation where it was so far away from both teams. But Henrik Mkhitaryan at the time played for Arsenal, who is Armenian. Armenia and Azerbaijan have had a long history of conflict, and Azerbaijan basically said like Mkhitaryan can't come, like we can't guarantee that he'll be fine, and so Arsenal had to leave a player at home because of that. So they're definitely this is obviously a completely different situation, but there is like kind of weird precedents for that where like the I think sometimes there are geopolitical realities that kind of overshadow sport. Obviously the US is I think the reality that the US and the Gulf states are all countries that are very much like not on Iran's side here. And those are all the players that are influencing Infantino, I think means that like there is not a lot of leverage to include Iran in this tournament given its status on the world stage. I would argue that like I very much hear your point. I would argue that like if FIFA is willing to ban countries, Iran should have been banned years ago. So like I don't like I'm not necessarily morally against them not being included. I think
I'm
you're
not either.
more right that it's like it is a weird precedent for the US to be able to like kind of just unilaterally set that without any kind of discussion.
Yeah, I'm not against it in this instance. I'm just not sure if FIFA
I hear
wants
you.
the precedent
Yeah.
to be set that the host country gets to determine who can and cannot attend a World Cup. That, as a general principle, that seems quite problematic.
I think the only way that you can justify it is if you say that like Iran is a global security risk rather
Which
than
is
a
true.
risk specifically to the US, which again, I would say
Which
is
like
true.
7
But
or 8 countries right now can personally attest to. So
right. So I think in this circumstance, obviously like the conversations have not fully happened, but like I think if you put me in a court of law and asked me to defend this decision if it actually comes, which we don't know that it will, I think I'd be able to make a pretty good
of course.
case for it.
Mhm.
But I do think that on the flip side, you're right that like giving the host nation sole discretionary power will result in a lot of controversy in the long run that I don't think international sports wants.
Yeah. If we can take a very, very short digression from Iran and
I
just
think we
finish
need
up here
to.
on the World Cup.
Yep.
Not only is it likely that Iran is not going to be participating, but there are also wide concerns that Mexico, who is one of the host countries, who is hosting, I believe, is it 8 games?
It's a good amount. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head,
like
but
is also just having massive internal political upheaval, mass violence, mass murder, and their ability to host matches. We still have a few months for this to get resolved, but also seems to be at this point in significant jeopardy given just the amount of violence between the Mexican government and the cartels right now.
Yeah, it is kind of just a brief moment of levity in this very serious show, but like we have like constant controversy regarding the US, Mexico being gripped by violence, and then just Canada on this little joyful side plot where nothing
Canada's
seems
got
to be
it all together.
happening.
If they'll just stop cheating, they've got the rest of it all
That's so
together.
true. You're so right. How could I forget? No, but in all seriousness, so yeah, I mean, El Mencho, who is the head of one of Mexico's biggest two cartels, was killed by the Mexican government in an operation a couple weeks ago. And in response, the cartels who, de facto govern large areas of the country and are everywhere and run, I think, multi-billion-dollar businesses and armies of literally tens of thousands of people, basically just set whole areas of Mexico on fire, locked cities down. Guadalajara, which is one of the World Cup host cities, was gripped by violence. Gunmen were in the airport. Like, streets were blocked with cars on fire as the cartel just went around, just like pillaging, basically. It seems like it has calmed down. But with the World Cup, like 3 months around the corner, and the country, at least briefly, in total chaos, obviously we've seen some controversy in the US too, which people have talked about, but this is on a completely different level to what was happening in Minnesota. And I think the reality is just like what FIFA has to ask is will the World Cup be safe? I think it will go ahead in Mexico. Like, to me, there's no way it gets called back. But there's definitely question marks about what the fan experience is going to be like there. Um, similar, like there were huge protests and police riots and clearing cartels out in Brazil out of the World Cup there in 2014. So this is not something that's like that the World Cup is completely foreign to in terms of like almost getting things ready. Like, part of me thinks that Mexico is like in a way trying to flush the cartel out ahead of time. But obviously it's just when you have criminal organizations that are that powerful, it makes things complicated. So I don't know if you have any like reaction to what you expect is going to happen over there, but I just do think this World Cup is coming at an insane geopolitical time in world history, and it just feels uniquely tense in a time where like there's not like a international war, like a World War II kind of situation where like the World Cup is on pause, but everything feels so tense right now.
Yeah. I obviously find it very concerning that it seems like the Mexican government is actually not powerful enough to stop the cartel from causing problems if the cartel
It's
wanted
just
to.
true. Yeah.
However, I believe that it is in the best interest of both the Mexican government and the Mexican drug cartels that the World Cup happen and be successful. I think that from a tourism perspective and also from an import export perspective of certain substances that the cartel profits greatly from, I think everyone would just like this event to to go well
That's probably
and to
fair.
be a success. And so if we can just get like a truce or a ceasefire just for the summer, not to make trivial of like a very, very serious and a very, very difficult situation for much of the population of Mexico, but um I would be shocked if these games did not go off successfully from both sides.
Yeah, I mean, this continues to be our stance, just like with the US
Of
and
course, yeah.
ICE
There's too
protests
much
and
there's
all the
too much
things.
money and too much tourism involved in these events for them to not be successful.
Right.
Like
And it's the same.
whatever
Yeah.
else you have, it gets set aside when we're talking about this influx of people and money and the ways that these host countries prosper and profit from these events.
Right. And you see the same thing with Trump. We were all worried ahead of the Club World Cup about ICE being at stadiums and what that would look like and would there be controversy. And then genuinely nothing happened. And the same thing it's going to happen here. Qatar, which, we obviously lambasted for literal years before they hosted the World Cup. There was some controversy that happened periodically, but ultimately it was a pretty smooth World Cup where most of our memories, other than the coverage ahead of the World Cup, from the actual tournament were pretty positive. The same was true with Russia in 2018. Even the world's worst of countries kind of get it together. So I certainly expect that even though things are complicated, both Mexico and the U.S. and hopefully the cheating Canadians will all get it together in the same way.
Yeah. All right, let's go back to Iran.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on beyond the upcoming sporting events. Like I mentioned, one of the I think the most significant acts of protest we've seen, obviously the mass protests that we have been able to see from inside Iran have been very significant. However, there's been a huge crackdown on internet and cellular access in that country in the wake of the protests. There is no clear estimation on how many people have been murdered by the Islamic regime in Iran, and so it's much harder to actually ascertain what's going on in those protests. But on international television, just a couple days ago, the Iranian women's soccer team played against South Korea, and they purposefully did not sing the national anthem. Um, this comes in the wake of uh, a professional soccer player from Iran, Zara Azadpour, who plays in Iran and has actually trained. She was not on the women's World Cup or women's national team, but she had trained with the national team. She it was reported by a lot of independent and kind of resistance news networks inside and outside of Iran that she was in fact murdered and gunned down by the Islamist State in Iran during one of these protests. And so I'm sure that from a personal perspective, that must have hit very hard with members of the women's soccer team. And also, I'm sure based on the projections of how many people do oppose the regime in Iran, also just aligns with that. This protest aligns with the ideology of many of the athletes who are playing for that team.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was doing my research ahead of this show, the story of women's sports in Iran has stuck out to me more than anything as kind of an indicator of where the people of Iran are at and what they want and the freedom that they want, and just the absolute determination not to give it to them by the Iranian government, particularly by Ayatollah Khamenei. Um, you mentioned Azadpour, who was murdered in the protests on January 9th of this year. When the protests started, like we said earlier, thousands of people hit the streets. And that meant that, you know, people of all walks of life, including tons of professional athletes, were on the streets leading protests. Iran, an interesting fact we learned is wrestling and bodybuilding are two of like the biggest sports and kind of activities that bring people into the limelight in
Yeah,
Iran.
freestyle wrestling is the national sport of Iran.
Yeah, apparently Greco-Roman wrestling is another big thing that like everyone loves there. And so tons of these people are basically kind of young people, influencers on the Iranian internet. Um, and tragically, as those people who are young, who, are exposed to the world at large, who want freedom to be able to speak their minds, um, to have artistic expression, to, dress and act the way they want, and, live men alongside women without being segregated off from each other and all kinds of things. Um, those professional athletes were often seen kind of leading the way, whether on social media or in person at the protests, and were killed as a result. Multiple pro wrestlers and bodybuilders were sniped in crowds or in machine gun blasts. Like you said, that soccer player was as well. And there are some estimates that say that at least 30 professional athletes were among the thousands and thousands of people who were killed. And so it just kind of, I don't know, to me, it's it's a unique situation. We talk about somewhere like China, where the population is just absolutely enormous, and there are people. The government does repress its people there, but people also have, to a degree, at least some degree, more personal freedom. It feels like than the people of Iran did, and Iran is interesting because unlike unlike China, Iran was a relatively progressive, westernized state, where a lot of people, had ties to the US and to Europe and traveled, and it was an affluent place that was very wealthy. It was, in a way, kind of the UAE of its time, where people were immigrating back and forth prior to the revolution in 1979. That was the feeling of a lot of the people, and then the revolution happened. But the feelings of the populace haven't really changed over time. They still have yearned for freedom. They've pushed against the boundaries of the regime in so many different ways, and I think that, as I read about the courage of the female athletes in particular who were constantly pushing back, that stuck out to me more than anything.
Yeah. As is the case with many Muslim countries that practice Sharia law, when we talk about repression or human rights abuses, there is a double standard that is encoded into Sharia law between men and women, and even outside of what is legal, there are also, um, as has been documented by journalists, there is a lot of I guess, discretion that is
Mm-hmm.
afforded to men, even outside of the law in those countries that is often not afforded to women. So when we talk about repression, the plight of women is the most obvious place where that exists. And we can even see that within the sporting culture in Iran. Um, the Iranian Olympic Committee has stated in their written guidelines that severe punishments will be meted out to those who do not follow Islamic rules during sporting events. Severe punishment in America might not sound too bad, but severe punishment in Iran and in Sharia law can be quite quite brutal. Public flogging is not an uncommon legal practice in Iran. There are things called retributional punishments, where people can be blinded or have their hands or feet cut off. Um, I'm not saying that's happening because of sporting violations, but that just kind of like that's just like the nature of the
Mm-hmm.
punishments that do happen in this country. The last reported case of a public stoning was in 2018 in Iran, when two people were, according to a Human Rights Watch organization, stoned to death in Iran just 8 years ago. So we're talking about, again, a very severe and repressive regime. Women are not allowed to participate in any sport in which they may accidentally come into any physical contact with a male referee, which has led to a lack of female representation at many international sporting events, including the Olympics. Over the course of 4 Olympics from 1996 until 2008, in over 4 Olympics, 4 Summer Olympics, there were only 6 female Iranian athletes total over the course of 4 Olympics. So barely more than one Iranian woman per Olympics. That's just a few examples, but I think it's just worth considering that you can see the overall state of the repression kind of in small form through the way that their female athletes are treated and how much freedom or lack thereof they are afforded.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it raises an interesting issue to kind of view this through, is women's soccer, specifically around rules regarding playing in hijabs and playing in front of fans of different kinds. So between 1979 and 1990, per the Center for Human Rights in Iran, women were just completely banned from international sports entirely. They're just like, uh, basically, the rules in a lot of ways come down to women being seen by men while playing sports, or women being seen without wearing a hijab, which is the Muslim clothing that all women are required to wear in Iran, covering their hair. And in addition, so this meant that women couldn't play sports. It means that in general, women have not been allowed to go to sporting events with men, period, in Iran. That has been loosened a little bit over the last few years, but this is genuinely like a post-COVID thing that has happened basically at all. They tried to loosen it a little bit in 2006, and Ayatollah Khamenei said, absolutely not. I have no interest in allowing this. Um, so basically, women's soccer, which was essentially banned as an organized sport for a while in terms of full field outdoor, kind of grew as indoor futsal, where women could kind of play in enclosed spaces by themselves without any men present at all, no male coaches or anything like that. And they were allowed to play in Iran only if they were wearing a hijab, but they could not go and compete in front of men in any kind of context. And so that meant that women could not compete in international soccer for a long time. Eventually, that ban was lifted, and there was an opportunity for women to play according to the regime's rules in hijabs. However, at the time, FIFA actually banned players from competing in hijabs as well as kippas and the Sikh turbans. So there was kind of like a general ban on religious headgear. That after FIFA banned Iran from a qualifier against Jordan in 2011, FIFA actually kind of revisited those rules and lifted them.
I think rightly so.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting example. So like the women clearly really wanted to compete and were being stopped to compete by Iran's rules in different ways. And as the repression kind of started to lift, the only thing stopping them was that hijab ban. And I would agree, like, I'm not gonna, obviously neither of us are Muslims. I'm not gonna litigate, the beliefs of every single Muslim person about the hijab and head coverings and um, all kinds of things like that and everything around women. But I do think, like, when you look at the regime of Iran, there is an institutionalized control and abuse of women from the very top that is religious in nature. And, I think that in this circumstance, given the rules and given the religious nature of wearing a hijab, I think that was the right call to not be punishing women writ large in Iran for the rules of the governing body of the country. Um, but again, it's a good example of the complications of of women and athletes at large kind of pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable in their country while still needing to do it inside their system and their religion. Um, and over time, cracks kind of started to show. Like, women went from being not allowed to play ever to being allowed to play first in front of women and then in front of men and women. There have been numerous instances. I'm a little hazy on whether it's a consistent thing, but women have been allowed to attend matches with men, both viewing men and women's sports in Iran. Um, and that's not something that would have ever happened 20 or 30 years ago, So things have started to change, even in terms of what the top down approach is allowing. Um, but now we're at a real turning point. And I think the question in my mind is, like, where does Iran go from here?
Yeah, I mean, so much of that depends on what happens to the Iranian government in the short term. Is there a successor to the Ayatollah, or does a government that is more supportive of or propped up by America and other Western culture forces, as well as other regional powers in the Middle East, take over? That's gonna be the primary determination. I will say for our podcast and for our listeners, it's worth taking away from what you just said the fact that as much as we decry sports washing in all of its forms, exposure to sports does seem to be a way to help loosen countries from oppression.
Mhm.
Saudi Arabia is a huge example of a country that has progressed beyond where Iran has at that point, and part of that is driven by sporting culture, by a desire to attend sporting events, by the kind of the easing of those kinds of regulations. Obviously, in Saudi Arabia now, women are allowed to drive cars. They're allowed to attend sporting events. Um, you know, the Saudi Arabian domestic soccer league has become quite a big international draw for both men and women. And so is it possible that Iran 10 years from now could look like Saudi Arabia today? Absolutely. Would that be good for their people compared to where they are now? Yes, of course. Is it as good as we want? Is Saudi Arabia exactly where we want them to be? Still, of course, not.
Certainly
No,
not.
but sports can be an agent for progressive change and for progress. And I think that if we're going to continue to monitor this story over the next, certainly in the short term with the World Cup, but beyond that, so much of it hinges on where the leadership of Iran comes from next and how involved, not to get us back into the political weeds, but how involved and how invested the United States and other countries are in presenting an alternative government to the people of Iran.
No, I think
Um,
it's exactly right. I think it's exactly
yeah,
right. It just makes me think like I don't know why I keep coming back to this question in relation to it, but I do think I guess that question of sports washing that you raised of do you exclude or include the worst actors among the world's countries in sports? Like, what is positive versus negative? Because I could point to a whole lot of things that has happened in relation to the Gulf states where their inclusion and domination of sports has been a negative. Obviously, we can point to from my vantage point, Russia or China's involvement in global sports. I wouldn't necessarily advocate for like the banning of China from world sports, but like when we look at the human rights records of both countries, you can make an argument for it, right? Um,
I guess you got scared of the Chinese backlash to our last podcast. You're now no longer
no, I
advocating for
mean,
their. No,
no, I
I'm just
mean,
kidding.
yeah. Ultimately, I'm gonna stand. You guys can go look at the YouTube comments. I was doing battle with some people last week. But no, but in all seriousness, like the question of where you draw the line and what is productive, what is like a disagreement between countries and like a geopolitical conflict that is between two countries but not the world, and is this a human rights violation that means that you should be excluded from international sports is really hazy right now. Again, like China has basically committed what we believe to be genocide, potentially of millions of people that we barely talk about right now. Iran obviously has killed its own people. Iran was never banned from sporting events; it self-banned itself. Um, you know, Russia basically was only banned after doping its athletes for years. Um, but there are many countries around the world where you could look at them and say, like, okay, if it's them, then why not them too? And but then you raise a good point, which is like something we've thought about a lot, which is there is there value with certain types of repressive countries in almost giving the people of the country a way out and the ideas of the rest of the world a way in? And like, does that outweigh the burnishing of their self-image that they get? I don't know that I have a firm answer. Maybe that's just not a very helpful thought, but I just find myself thinking about that constantly in relation to this story and wondering if there is a solution um, that really would like make the sports world a better place. Not that most of the people in the sports world actually care, but
I think that one of the things that I have come to understand about our world is that and we've known this, but it's the fact that these decisions are being made by these international sporting bodies being made because of optics and not morality,
Right.
right?
It's just very true.
Why is Russia banned for invading Ukraine, but China is not banned for potentially committing genocide, or if not genocide, internment of the Uyghur Muslims? And why is Saudi Arabia not banned for carpet bombing Yemen? And why is the United States not banned for toppling the Venezuelan government? Right? Those are all not the same thing. They're degrees, but what the decisions are being made based on where the spotlight of international media attention is, where they would expect public outcry if they did not take a specific choice. And so FIFA and the IOC can decide that we care about the lives of Ukrainians more than we care about the lives of the people in Yemen for many complicated reasons, including international political government treaties and organizations. Once the IOC or FIFA get in the business of making moral decisions about international conflict, they get caught in these logical inconsistencies all the time. And it stems from the fact that they're not making moral, consistent choices. They're making choices that they believe will serve their best interest optically or financially. And so that's how we end up at the decisions where we are at. And again, I support the banning of Russia, and I will support the prohibition from Iran from attending the games if that is what is ultimately decided. Um, and I and but that does not mean the that I trust FIFA or the IOC to be making these decisions in any way, shape, or form, because I don't.
Right, because they've proven over and over again that they don't deserve that trust, right? Like the fact that the World Cup ended up in Russia and Qatar back to back basically turned out to be a giant bribery scam. Like that's just like on the record, like that happened. And he was too late to take it away from them once it had been confirmed. Um, Obviously, these organizations are reliant on money from all kinds of different areas and different actors, both bad and good. And that's just kind of the nature of sports. Like we love it for what it is, and the sometimes the drama of international competition is heightened by this kind of conflict in a way that like makes it more entertaining to a degree, but ultimately like that's not the point of sport. And that's certainly not like what we actually want in the world. Um, and I don't know. I think that reflecting on the story and where we're at with Iran, obviously my number one hope is that the people of Iran get the freedom that they so obviously have deserved for so many years. Um, and that's kind of like always the hope of sport in a way. Like sport to me is both weirdly a very pessimistic, cynical thing, and also a very optimistic thing that like does actually bring people together. Like I can think of so many opportunities and situations where I've played soccer with people from all over the world in different situations, and shared a bond with them that is, that it completely traverses boundaries and language barriers. Like I've played soccer with kids, on exchange trips from China, and built friendships that just kind of in a second because we both know who Gareth Bale is, and like no matter who you are, where you're from, like that global language is something that does draw us together in a very special way. And so like I never want to take that away from people who are yearning for a way out of a place that is tearing them down and destroying their lives. Um, and at the same time, obviously, like I don't want to see those places feel emboldened by the success of the people that they're oppressing,
Yeah,
and so obviously ultimately Iran in this case did not care enough about its athletes and their successes to protect their health and safety. And that's why we're at where we're at today. But yeah, I think these are conversations that we're going to continue having ahead of the World Cup, and it'll be interesting to see kind of in 3 months where this conflict is at and what FIFA lands on.
Yeah, my hope is for the safety of all people in the Middle East, and I'm thinking especially about U.S. military who are stationed in various regions in the Middle East, as well as, like you mentioned, for a peaceful and free future for the people of Iran. Hopefully, they will be able to achieve a government that is aligned with the values that I believe best promote individual liberty and human flourishing. And, and hopefully that they, and it's not something that I think their people deserve, but, it seemingly is something that their people want,
Hmm.
as we've seen this year. And, I pray that they will be able to achieve it, in whatever capacity that looks. And so, as we continue to, I think, spend so much of this year thinking about the World Cup, I know that this is something that we will return to. Um, Certainly as the headlines of the current continue to play out, but also projecting what the summer is gonna continue to evolve and change and move to as well.
Yep, absolutely. And of course, appreciate the thoughtful conversation as always. And listeners, if you guys have questions or comments or even disagreements with us, obviously welcome that. I think that this is a time to take a step back and really think about where we're at as a planet, and come together with people who are different from us, because ultimately, like, no matter how brutal or how serious any conflict is, like, that human connection we have with people who are different from us is like one of the most precious things in the world. And so yeah, I'm assuming we don't have any listeners in Iran, but if we do, or people who are Iranian by descent, we'd love to hear from you guys and hear some of your perspectives for sure.
Yeah, please, you can find us in the comments if you're watching us on YouTube. You can also find us on our social medias across most of the major social media platforms, and we do hope that you will subscribe and like the podcast wherever you are engaging engaging it from, whether that's audio only, whether that's video on Spotify or YouTube. We also hope that you would share this podcast with a friend who also likes thinking about sports and culture and would be interested in this. We would love to continue to be able to have this conversation and this dialogue with more and more people. So, I think that's it for the podcast this week, John.
Think so.
Um, the sports calendar goes on. There'll be much more European soccer to discuss, and as our emotions continue to ebb and flow with every passing weekend, and we'll be back soon with an episode about sports and culture. And until then, we hope that you all continue to be well and be safe. And we'll talk to you later.
All right. Cheers, guys.